Hello, humanity. There is a breaching method that made countries A through Z only, first forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to blame things for what? There are proofs in nature is what we are observing. Is nature showing us that there's a human fact should be nature breaching method that is not countries A through Z. And it exploited, even if it's not still standing, it exploited and made identities of roles with its abridged system only and roles with it only permitted. Otherwise, that body was sensed. That was only permitted too, including if it was any group, even the majority as that body, including if it was any united country. Their voicing. This preaching method uses it remotely. We could observe this with where and how. The breaching method only permitted roles with slavery northern colonies and southern colonies. Then phenomenon transpired relative to the plural founders of America and their plan. And James Madison, in James Madison's plan, we're supposed to refer to it as his plan and their roles with it. And we're supposed to understand and observe how there were a plural of founders that intercolonies, forced inside. There were more than 13 colonies entrenched inside them at key locations and people. They forced counter extorted no means but to counter with layers of other interests and needs, not just countries, international companies with them. They had even slavery entrenched roles, northern colonies, southern colonies. Then America's founders were born. There are proofs that it was native tribes against native tribes before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Forgiveness is not to leave out where guilt is discernible. Everyone was guilty, right? And then, but we know about this. In other words, then you step back, all the databases were criminally foreign influenced, / worse. There was an organized method that was following. It knew there would be a hyper-forensic trail, for example, with how it had slavery only permitted. Laws against all women at the same time, though. At the same time, against all native difference, /s. And that caused all kinds of negative value, nature progressions, acts, nature's demonstrations of it, needs for help from that. It was a part with all that, too. Think about what was behind all those sick things at the same time, not just to use us remotely from abroad, / hyper abroad, without anyone even realizing at countries A through Z. This bridging method has everyone sensing for it. Not free speech and honesty, appreciating exceptions proper, thought about what we all agree about. We all agree that we hunger and thirst not to be scientists, pretend to debate the whole ocean. And like with weapons, everyone separates it and leaves out when people speak about international law. Only an individual could speak for the. Oh, this is the group though, and this is our individual speaking. International law is even worse, capable of this breaching method. Got knew only locations, areas, and states could operate the phenomenon of the names of countries inside the science /s system that nature generates, unlike any other system. Well, as any system, including if one is made up like art, it is inseparable distinctly from and as the difference between the value of, or as the smallest finite detail, or the order of the finite. Distinctly as itself, nature's complete nature, to the extent we could discern its complete identity. It comes with its complete identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that, and or and this is also relative slash hyper relative to where to how it uses a special difference to show us this, part of showing us. Or Earth's a special difference, our own, but distinctly no. So ours could be forced from here, but not Earth's. Not our physics. Like we could take away look at the species that went extinct in the ocean, or the nature of it, the special difference of Earth's oceans. The fish are polluted. They have mercury in them, arsenic in them, plastic in them, medications in them. The whole ocean. See, this breaching method forced, checked, and persuaded names A through Z to use names of countries, suits and ties, counters, exceptions. We're in how you guys were child abused, and shown needs and means to counter it. Syntactically, to blame things, needs to blame things are a part of answers. Like what caused slavery? America's founders, plural, again, we don't know their names. They directed us to refer to themselves plural as James Madison. They also left declassified how, as James Madison left declassified with them, why and how they didn't have free speech. And then when James Madison was then also a president slash chief, he still didn't have free speech, while at the same time everyone had to pretend other to an extent. And everyone had to entertain too, for example, notions of and acceptations of decorum that were slash are collusion slash s. For example, with prisons used to hide life aggressions, right? Where how this uses names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, and the interbranch who are with a whole bunch of other countries associated with their campuses too, having been shown and being shown that they have to hide where and how they have self-body collusion slash s with things right with a predicate acts with facts method slash s, not even a lawyer. A predicate acts with facts method, a wire crimes method, the whole wire crime methods, plural, recorded. The agencies are recorded consciously. They speak about themselves. They speak about differences. What people say, but they leave out the exceptions. And or the people that say, in other words, the differences of guilt, all sides of issues, we're going to observe that hyperforeign, you guys it has replaced, right from a human fact human nature breaching method is a scientific value, replaced right from the communications of James Madison declassified, who demonstrated as nature does it, and from nature itself, that it's a scientific value. A human fact human nature breaching method is one of the things that all those sick affronts on women, on Native Americans, on black people's right to lives. Slavery entrenched northern colonies, southern colonies, and northern and southern states. They had to slowly let go of it, the North, during the war, because it was forced. They were forced by James Madison's plan to fight, while neither of them had roles to step out fully from the slavery method, the torture extortion method. Yet, against all women too, against all Native Americans, yet. Native Americans, the people below, even the Native American grounds are tactically denatured, separated from our human body together means. Human body together goes boom, 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 at all locations, areas, and states, grouped. Too. Group means are way more mighty than what was built before America's founders were born. This is a part of what's going on with the subjects in the news. And people speak of markets, all as voices, styles of logic, natures of logic, incapable of defending that and affording the integrity necessary based on, like, for example, of markets drop. You have roles with the torture, extortion, slavery method, and hyper additionally as its use slash s of ground, difference slash s. When did it stop using? how it designed everything. Like the suburbs were designed before America's founders were born for the torture, extortion, slavery method to use everyone effectively from abroad slash hyper abroad because they need the suburbs are designed to cause negative value, nature progressions, accidents, people needing food resources from other locations slash S. The suburbs. And the breaching method told everyone how to communicate about that. And it pretended other the whole time. It never let anyone stop using the words of everyone from the past, pretending they weren't forced to pretend free speech when they didn't have free speech. They weren't forced to leave out exceptions, to fake exceptions, plant them fake, preemptively, actively for group reasons, and simultaneously within as the value of all humanity voicing. Again, this is the first principle. There are experts that know more about American history stuff than me. This is beyond that. This came first. This stays beyond that. Till they connect what they learn to this. James Madison and the founding founders behind him, they had to counter-extort everyone. You guys won't even allow people to be honest about the extortion of George Washington. He told us to be honest about the extortion of himself. And to complete the rest of what he wanted to communicate to ourselves, like about why and how nobody had free speech. Everyone had to pretend other, not just for the reasons discernible. Again, this breaching method had multi-front things and people to blame properly to hide behind and through. Because the breaching method knew our countries A through Z were all the 6 things about at the same time. A human fact should be nature breaching method is presented to us by nature itself. The nature shows. So we can make hyper positives out of negatives because I'll donate this to the individual countries. In other words, for America to lead, the countries will all agree if we have a plan that will help. But there's a difference between countries working together with a plan if they're trying to speak about law and convictions and leaving out and faking exceptions as styles of logic. Like international law had obligations by nature itself, again, and by our founders, not just America's. They have replaced what our founders communicated, for example, that way, which is only part of it, though. Because there was a method and is a method slash S manifest relative to where there are theaters, the names of the people, the scientists, for example. Forgiveness is relative to because the differences of their guilt, the people countering them, people indifferent. In other words, the differences, the array of opinions and or that body was incensed relative to those things simultaneous, like black people's rights of eyes, where it is inseparable from any proper treatment of American history by per nature itself and per our founders. Our founders left declassified about how a breaching method reassigned black people's rights of eyes, syntax, and nature, and exploiting where and how nature will only be itself as criminal insidiousness some way slash S. And it wants us to examine that why and how. It is because its identity, its complete identity, to the extent we could discern. For example, we could discern nature's identity generating 2 species bodies across totally different species bodies. And each species body is made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies. But it is generating group differences too, like 2 eyes, 2 species, 2 sexes, 3 parts of time. 2 connected, past and now with your experience, active. Another way, the future, like the value of seasons, not even here, the value of the end of the season, even if it doesn't get here. It is only increasing because that is its identity. It is all things. there is an illness that is hyper additional from names A through Z. And it controlled each campus at countries A through Z to keep styles of logic, natures of logic, trying to fake it to make it, but to adapt. Because nature never stopped generating demonstration slash S of this hyperform that everyone wants to counter. But it never stopped being exploited. How it set up a whole bunch of styles needs they use remotely. Show that when they have to use other people remotely, show them they need to hide. What nature's actually demonstrating, what it actually demonstrated, and what it will be demonstrating. If we know there could be a market crash, we're supposed to discern what's behind. At the same time, what's behind the bricks of the building behind the people in the rap videos and behind the anger or the aggression. Everyone's saying you, in other words. But we still have black people as white survivors. No one forced that. That quality of fact should be nature that we could force with what we all agree about. And a breaching method knew that. So and a breaching method knew that it could show everyone. And they can't afford to have that discerned. Because not one has learned anything but logic, natures of logic, conviction, with the convictions, principles, treatments. For example, this main principle, because we don't even know that nature itself shows us anyway, even though our founders didn't, I didn't read them say it, besides how there was president / chief. And I didn't read it described that way, but it is manifest that way. Those are two incompatible volumes, except for one way. /S, and it also comes with a third hyper, like alpha and omega come with a third hyper invisible but still discernible identity of value / value progression here, or it is forced from here, not as death but as forced space nature transfer, as Leith of Hades, as a special difference transfer. So all the beauty of the ocean that will never come back, or unless our species body has to use how we are a body, by the body that is generating between species bodies things so we can discern its own to an extent, nature's body. And there's a science by this. And it comes with teaching about how nature is showing us that it is functional, how itself is itself, nature itself is distinctly itself as a hyper invisible but still discernible. That body we could discern hyper invisibly but still discernibly generating two species across bodies. In other words, two sexes across species bodies, two eyes, the 3 parts of time, generating things that some things that we generate with it, but while as it. But then we are further. It's complete identity relationship to itself, also positive onto itself, and negative onto negative the way it is, or it forces it from here. Nature itself shows us to discern the difference between criminal insidiousness, natures of peace, / hypercriminal insidiousness, natures of peace. Nature is showing us a hyper-additional name, even how and why. Nature is showing us it is more probable. I'm not even a lawyer. It is more probable and practical to label that to theorize, let alone to convict, that nature itself is showing us to blame a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise all at the same time, even if it was in it is not, even if it is not, and it never was. In other words, a proverbial devil, a proverbial shaitan. There are readings too of the religious books out of sequence and replacing what is dictated at the beginning of the Old Testament and what is dictated at the beginning of the Quran. And where there's a New Testament and the Old Testament, the differences of guilt with appreciation of how the preaching method had roles there. That was is also used to hide behind. Oh, it's this side of that. This preaching method. Same thing with because everyone was measured and maintained. Everyone has to understand the torture, extortion, slavery method came from before religious messages were born. It had already made the names of the people of the sciences incapable of, and only permitted to be collusion/S with what we can refer to as hyper-criminally foreign influence. Because to an extent we could discern it too, because there wasn't just England and Africa involved with slavery. And that's unnatural. And it's so fake. And there are demonstrations/S of it coming from nature itself with people's syntax regarding nature, regarding what they pretend is debatable or not, regarding the how the suburbs are tactically denatured, let alone the cities. The only way that can be defended at countries A through Z is by people that have the phenomenon of wars going on in the background, though. Have the phenomenon of how there are industries like psychiatry, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. I'm not even a doctor. They're putting fake transcripts and databases on a mass scale. They're faking and changing what people say. They're faking conversations about religion because people say they don't want to take drugs because of their religion. They pretend they have unrealistic notions of religion. Pay attention when you only hear through the years. People with, I don't get involved. We have people we can discern with delusions regarding religion. But we can't discern if they're real. Oh, but I'm just saying, we have to focus on what's with the nature of the debate. We have to get through where and how the preaching method was, his roles with it, and the differences of guilt. It used at the same time. So this is the most important thing about American history. And so, for example, when there's a leader or any individual, even a leader, even a king, even a pharaoh, this preaching method has nature demonstrating all locations, areas, and states, every single place the human species body is. They have criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence, fact-cheaping nature, quality aspects of nature that nobody wanted, including the breaching method. There are proofs that a transnational, not just a criminal enterprise, but one at the same time with 3 ranks of the government of more than one country at the same time. They knew they were going to get caught for something. And so they forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded others themselves to be blamed for things it did. And then it maintained nature's demonstration /S of that too. Also effectively used to keep the other things. And basically it evolved needing to hide lie progressions more and more. You need to keep others themselves blamed. And it developed a way it realized it could get the only people who could operate the phenomenon of the names of countries A through Z are people at locations, areas, and states. So if we could get them to wrongly blame other things, others, ourselves for what it caused, as both sides. And beyond that, it can more and more make defenses of that simultaneously more and more incapable of affording discerned distinctions that nature increasingly shows us to discern and to appreciate with our syntax, and where and how we don't, and when we don't, and why we don't. It demonstrates to us. It demonstrates to us people only dishonest, criminally foreign influence, factory nature, quality aspects of nature, and delusions raw regarding, you know, denials or appreciation of, how we have black people as white survivors, a breaching method reassigning that James Madison communicated about this with our founders, about how and why they had not just the guilt of the internationally monitored conversations. They don't want to speak about any of our parts of all those multi-front sick things against everyone, and against themselves. No, in fact, human nature more and more. This is part of the reason they can't afford to have anything valued in sequence. Things that they want to pretend passions and emotions about. The only people that the breaching method could afford to discern. But there are roles with that. So in other words, and industries never stop being rolled. In other words, so there are people that aren't going to be honest about the value of their worth, or if and where and how they owe money to people. There are more money owed by people pretending to be experts on reason. There are criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions rot in our face. Textbook definition of it. Having black people as white survivors is inseparable from any proper teaching of American history per nature itself, and per what our founders declassified about how the breaching method was behind it. But we have that replaced, and who needs to pretend other? They pretend not to. They pretend it's debatable. That the words of everyone at the time were measured. They were not free speech, and they were forced to tricked and persuaded to pretend they had free speech. We haven't had one sane voice, one honest voice. We had shock and awe only speak for what witch trials are about, with the witch trials placed next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Locations across the country, the founding locations. They have other communicated for them what our founders communicated to be communicated for those locations. They have roles assigning and having been assigned. Other things, others ourselves blamed for what the breaching method was to be blamed for. Like slavery. You guys have our founders blamed for slavery. And or our schools. And where you are correct, because our schools have been blaming our founders for slavery and replacing who they were at the same time. And with all exceptions, as James Madison is the only one they know the name of. So they want to pretend that's debatable. They will say, oh, well, Thomas Jefferson was the drafter of the Constitution. There were slavery rules, northern and south, the southern colonies only permitted. Collusions against all women, you don't vote on that. The two-party system, all that was all forced by James Madison's plan and the unnamed founders. The republic for which we stand was inherited, abridged, and in defenses of itself abridged. It could not and cannot afford discern what nature itself communicates to us, and then hyper-additionally with, to, from, as, with, and for the value of the republic for which we stand. We must demand correlation by this nature's means. Nature shows us how it is functional, being itself distinctly as the hyper invisible but still discernible. From how and why is it is the invisible but still discernible too. So where and how we pick a name for God, that's only capable of being about the invisible but still discernible. As nature shows, we can agree to only to an extent. And there is exception nature involved. Not what I said. In other words, this is about nature. Who wants to deny that religions are about nature? That's another proof that the experts on everything, they're getting it wrong. But the blame for that, because this breaching method also needs use of to hide behind and through collusion slash S with the differences of guilt. But in other words, we're all sides of not just of criminal civil cases, a different slash S appreciation is manifest that way because of how the breaching method. That's one of the things that reassign. Know how we have the same color eyes and different color eyes at the same time. That's not and simultaneously slash hyper simultaneously. Nature is showing us its difference. It is showing us. Our parents made our own eyes. If you have kids, I'll never have kids too, by the way, because people involved with the World Trade Center attack too, foreign and domestic. Get me on fake conversations with Channel 3 News. I don't have time for these games. Inter and intra cities. They have multiple police departments and courts used remotely criminally foreign influence with all sides of criminal civil cases, names at next to all natures of crime scenes and campuses at the same time, with the news used remotely. And as ones involved with the World Trade Center attack. And pretending it's personal, all that changing, I didn't know it's emotional. In other words, they speak about their emotions, then they have to pretend others, so they just do sick things and call it thinking without emotions. They have roles with a predicate acts with facts, method, slash S, all the names of the people, the sciences, including of the law. They have time collusions with criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists, even when they're not involved with the cases. They're being used to sense for the breaching method. People that are using and have used the words like radical and extremism, phrases like regime change, because they were shown and are shown they need to pretend other. Right where and how the conversation was. So individuals like leaders, they try to have calmness and be nice with everyone's names, but people at locations, areas, and states because of the hyper foreign forced with the foreign at the same time too. Though everything this breaching method did has shown needs to be done. In other words, there are a whole bunch of identities of integrity. People want to use their expertise on the markets and things like that. They don't even pay attention to what natures of industries do, even roles with slavery. It's a big difference. Oh, but this is the history of the market. This is the history of readings of the law. There was a breaching method entrenched. James Madison, our founders, explained to us why and how they were tortured, extorted, in fact, human nature enslaved, therefore physically. You guys have replaced, you have yourselves blamed. You have other things, others or selves blamed for the Civil War, or you are sensed and it is adapted to. Even if we all agree at the same time as a country, or as any grouping of countries. Even if we all agree countries A through Z, but we're still self-valued. And because we're used remotely self-valued, right, where no one self-valued being haven't been system stacked. We don't hunger and thirst to be system as we are. We have to blame what caused this and what caused this. It's a breaching method that is replaced from James Madison's communications and the plural founders behind him and his plan. Not one even allows sanely or honestly at the same time anyone to be honest about the extortion of George Washington Then those styles, needs, and natures of logic want to have debates about who said what, like James Madison's actual writing and things like that, leaving out what's actually recorded and communicated by him. Judge Napolitano, I believe he said it was read, it was written somewhere, or he made it up. But we have rights that are, nature shows us it is true anyway. We have rights that are too numerous to have to list them. That's one of the reasons we're supposed to be allowed free speech. Also, this breaching method uses how it hurt and hurts the branches of government. The different types of police, they're going to speak on difference. It's going to hurt them if they don't speak on it wrong. It controls and control. It never stopped being not just entrenched in America. To be able to understand how it was entrenched in other countries, you have to first understand how it is still in control of the syntax regarding American history. Pretending science is using the people's words, leaving out the breaching method. Pretending our founders were other than they were. If they were, then, in other words, if you didn't, you would understand the breaching method involved. Then you would understand anything you heard about our founders with slavery. They had to lie about themselves. People were only allowed to be collusion/S. Forgiveness is because if you start blaming, leaving out the breaching method, you're going to make mistakes. That exactly the ones it needs, because it will have that, nature will demonstrate those mistakes. Oh, but I won't. It won't matter, and that, and then these the motivations narratives too. A human fact nature breaching method knew that nature would increasingly demonstrate its identity through its roles with everyone's motivations. It is what motivates you guys to, with what you say or don't regarding what you think about how and why really we need like plastic water bottles. How and why we need to ignore. How and why there are mercury, arsenic, lead, things in the fish, plastics, medications, even in the ocean, all this stuff. In other words, plus there are long-lived isotopic particles. Per reporting on CNN, I believe it was. Isotopic particles, long-lived, like something with the nuclear. People need energy. We don't have one honest voice for science because they were abused since they were kids. As to be styles pretending other. Nature's dependent upon those facts, nature qualities aspects. Pretending that using the truth for a lie. American Revolution was fought against England, but was also fought against that breaching that method that was entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies, even with slavery. Even replacing with nature itself communicates with black people's rights of eyes and the revelations that come with it. Not just that we have black people's rights of eyes and sharks do, for example. Others, even birds have two eyes. I mean, even insects look like they have two eyes. They have an extent of consciousness of our own, too. In other words, so how we can make peace is by seeking hyper peace and observant and being observant by how it does and could exist. And the difference between hyper criminally foreign influenced and criminal foreign influences. Because once, so to speak, hyper criminal foreign influences were countered wrongly. They were counted wrongly as counters to criminal foreign influences wrongly. That were designed to have counters to that too, where all sides are used remotely more and more by the identity of the hyper foreign that is inherent to, active to, and progressive to. The identities of logic, the natures of logic, of the names of the people of sciences, and of the names of the people of the uses of passers-by. And even of readings of statutes and precedents that give the benefit of the doubt at the last second. No, what it was supposed to be to the people based on their job, their title, etc. That's one of all kinds of readings of statutes and exception to the breaching method used to show and uses to show. For example, the people speaking about crimes that they need to hide that have roles with wrongdoing, with criminal foreign influences / hyper-criminal foreign influences, with directions to hide exploitation / this and that. And it's relativity where how, for example, just how they're shared all the countries together. That forces them to hide things that aren't even real things, ignore things, need to pretend other, and so do it in other contexts, incapable of defending that and affording the factual nature quality aspects of nature necessary to show the discernment of the breaching method present with our instances treatments, our names treatments. But they are also stealing the identity of the inside the Ninth Circuit Court, for example, next to the World Trade Center towers, the morning of the attack. Before the attack, sometime before it, from inside the court, timely stamped legal papers had been insidiously from inside the court time stamped late and then presented to the panel of judges that way, right before the World Trade Center attack in Manhattan, New York, America. And then we drove back to Connecticut right before the attack. We weren't in the attack, or we weren't next to it right that morning. And names on all sides of that case in the court had the sequence shift, had their identity stolen. It was worse than that because these are also people interstates, intrastates, leading up to the World Trade Center attack. People involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and Central Connecticut State University's roles with Saudi Arabia are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, and with all these other countries at the same time, and border states and borders countries, as ones involved with all the other countries in the world. They have roles with also through time, with the differences of guilt there, or the names next to or conjunctive to it and to that, used also at other locations /s, where they were shown needs, means, and nature itself can be used to force, hurt, trick, and persuade other things, others, or selves, to be demonstrated where and how the breaching method is manifest as nature's identity is, inseparable from all things. But now, as a hyper-additional, like a illness through humanity, that's why there are bombs as a solution, and where there are excuses rather that all sides have at the same time. Like for what excuses there, where there are no excuses, all sides are using them at the same time. Because, for example, fake news is evidence. Connecticut's Channel 3 News has roles with all these different countries, including Saudi Arabia, I don't know the names, and multiple police departments involved with all kinds of federal evidence crimes and that, and identity theft, fraud, slanders, and roles of people also attaching other. So they have roles with the differences of the intelligence that and the people that work for them, or the people next to or conjunctive to them and to that. Increasingly retired Wethersfield police chiefs also have collusion /s with them, with people directly and indirectly, also with their extended family members involved with child abusers, leaders, and kids. And as names involved interstates coordinated with the World Trade Center attack, also with the names internationally involved, and their roles through the years with other natures of federal evidences crimes, and fake ties, fake natures of ties between people. Fake exceptions planting too. This breaching method uses and used interstates, names on all sides of criminal civil cases, the interbranch, and the intelligence born of domestic. Their campuses layers of other, and at the same time with the same sequences, the same relative delusions self-value. Those delusions are of scientific value relative to the value of black people's rights of life, and simultaneously where and how nature itself communicates revelations with this. And hyper additionally, where and how James Madison and our plural founders did also communicate about how the breaching method reassigned black people's rights of life, how people speak for women's rights, how people speak for anyone's right, therefore, slash S. The quality of fact sheeting nature, of distinctions, appreciation. Forgiveness is to get to that quality fact sheeting nature that focus on the predicate acts, but facts method slash S itself. That's all we have to address. Thank God, though, the majority, everyone agrees about things. That's the only people that are allowed to be heard in few platforms. With all the exceptions too, won't let appreciate it like black people's rights of life. That they're going to want to appreciate the expertise outside of courts, distinctly from how it's used inside courts. We're going to pay attention to what the witch trials were about next to the Webb trials, where George Washington had to come with James Madison's plan and the leverage of the plural founders behind them to counter story, to force people to break layers of laws against, reality that they weren't allowed to break, or they would be sensed and hurt through our own, as human species body of individual bodies, an individual species body of individual bodies. Nature has been showing us that it generates individual species bodies, each one made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies. So that could show us that it's, to an extent, how to discern its body to an extent, and why and how we can only discern it to an extent. But why and how that value was only increasing, and with two other values next to it, increasing inside itself, distinctly from the rest of itself, but non-distinctly. Nature is showing us how it is making more of itself through itself. It's making more of itself as an identity of forever nature, making more of itself through temporary / lasting space nature. And English was revealed to be taught this way. Appreciating when using where and how the sciences share an identity and where and how they appear now too. It comes with demonstration / S of the same. And there is one way to fight where everyone wins or else we sense. One thing we can do is beg the people that are not with nuclear weapons, or ones on the threshold where it's just so fast in school across the world. Because what's being forced when they force international law? Voices. These are people that are collusions with locations, areas, and states, styles, needs, and natures of logic individually grouped together, every single country. Nay, the more they are grouped, the more the individual voice can't afford the quality of fact-sheeting nature necessary to counter and to overcome the breaching method that we have black people's rights of eyes to discern. It is time. We can even make, nature show / S come with pantheism. Every Sunday there can be economic development and means out of nowhere at countries A through Z. And a plan that will change. We can make the countries that have wars right now agree to, like, if they have make it easier for them to make agreements. If like, in other words, the loser wins. In other ways, in other words, to contract it for the rest of the world. Because if we can get to a state for just better than free, you know, the quote superpowers could share a boat and like, okay, look what we're gonna do for these people. But we have the whole time, and because it's just for ourselves with ourselves, if we have the world locked stupid together, locked hyper additionally the tactically denatured ground. The suburbs look alike from America to Russia to Ukraine, even though they were designed by torture, extortion, slavery method to use all remotely from abroad, to be a landscape theater, reliant upon food, resources, means, needs, things, all through the breaching method roles. There were multiple countries and themselves that were used remotely from hyper abroad and from abroad. And the difference of that is exploited. It doesn't help any country to prevent an American from explaining. And Americans are the ones that do. Forcing us not to explain it because you had American history taught wrong. The principles. This is the principle. This is the plan. This is the understanding why and how there was a breaching method entrenched that they had to leave entrenched. What method did it use? It was a method /S. Only allowed everyone plural roles, therefore the slash is the nature, criminal insidious is nature, the positive treatments, negative treatments were appreciated as factory nature. People need energy now. Let alone the suburbs were designed for the torture extortion to be used remotely from abroad, let alone now. Even more tactical in nature, even more packed, relying on only capable of having nature demonstrate negative values, progression, vaccinations. We're using positive and negative, not to like nature, where and how it shows us cell body, cell nucleus, cell wall /S, and gases in their mixture are coming through. Water and its elements, positive or negative to the complete identity relationship to itself as itself, nature's. Nature shows us how water can become polluted or cloudy, you can't see through it. Just like it shows us that with the clear. Nature showing us there is criminal insidiousness, nature / hyper criminal insidiousness nature. We can't see through. Because of all truths about the criminal insidiousness nature alone. In other words, for example, the criminal foreign influences alone are only allowed to be blamed. Now one has trained because all the names of the people of science, including of the law, they already had time collusion /S with all sides of criminal and civil cases, all natures of privatized, concentrated, where they have at triages, hospitals with mental health care side. They're putting fake transcripts there to hide lie progressions, to hide their roles with different /S, collusion /S, all kinds of evidences, rackets, and relative delusions. We have to pay attention to where and how the reason experts have been stayed criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw and incapable of repenting, like pupils. We have to force that fact-checking nature with the World Wide Web and with YouTube. How many YouTubers did we could? There's a difference between changing the world, in other words, or using nature's, method of speaking about, showing us how to speak about power /might perfectly hyper perfectly, or we sense. Either anyone. That's what made the republic for which we stand evolve to that which then became criminally engineered / hyper criminally re-engineered. Manifest appreciations of itself. Only remembered. the campus martius of the republic for which we stand, its system/s. They also relied upon exceptions and exception nature, like people with other languages and other systems of memory, where and how they appreciated all differences because they are about its difference. The more we can discern, do things to be able to discern further that which is showing us to discern itself to the extent we can. Again, we're in how it's generating individual species bodies of individual bodies and group differences across species bodies. Nature's identity. God, there's a God variable that came with ancient pantheism that also is necessary to make the republic for which we stand function properly. Think about if we organize, in other words, hyper additional cartoon characters to fit in upon the people stacked. Because we have to get an international spot and we can consolidate tasks by making like people that have the worst position to try to get help from or try to get a job and things like people stacked upon in New York City and all across the world. For example, so we make it like them in a virtual agent or agency. Enroll with this method, with this plan/S as a world agency, admitting, observing, and overcoming where and how at countries A through Z, everyone was only allowed to fathom being systems tactical terrier from nature's where and how integrity is spoken about. And to defend that as styles that are going to be what? Therefore dependent upon how the breaching method only permitted, for example, the gangs of New York City to be propagated and then self-cultivated through our own, the same ones countering that. They're incapable of speaking for the law, of speaking for problems, because they came through breach. Each age of fact should be nature multi-front. Everywhere the human species body is, it has simultaneously a might that no other age of the humanity has, as each age of difference has. Child, middle age, and adult. Simultaneously has a weakness that no other age has. All things come with its demonstration of itself, nature's complete identity, its complete identity relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that. It is the same individual nature self, generating all group differences, or it demonstrates to us when we were, when we are, or the moment we will be using a systems abridged from its own. Again, where and how it's about positive and negative. Where it's about and how it's about the hyper clear. And where and how to make positive value nature progressions, acts, and nature as a means out of nowhere here. Again, or they're forced away from here as force-based nature transfer, as the least of Hadiths, nature as a word hyper-additional for identity. For the same reason/s that we need to value more than one name for a verb. And this is where and how, for example, we could discern, partially how we could discern the body of the hyper-invisible but still discernible, distinctly from the invisible but still discernible. The parts of speech of English grammar are all about the invisible but still discernible. They have names, but we could discern we're discerning the body of the hyper-invisible but still discernible. Where how we could discern parts of it as the present participle and the past participle, which these are inflections of verbs. A hyper-additional name for a verb. And why and how there were only two parts of time. Participle, there's not a future participle. The future is distinctly discernible here and connected to the active. Three parts of the rest of nature's complete identity. They're inseparable from all the individual parts of itself, all the group parts of itself, and then from all simultaneous parts of itself. In other words, from all the smallest finite detail part of the whole body is inseparable from that, distinctly from how it is, and it's a quality of diffusion that is forced. That requires appreciation of how nature uses a special difference. Earth's a special difference, for example, is shown to us. A part of where and how nature demonstrates to us that we have a concentrated value here. Where its identity nature is equal to itself at all parts of itself. But there is a temporary concentrated value here. Where and how it shows us and showed the ancients that nature is making more of its identity a forever nature through temporary / lasting space nature. And nature shows us the moment names A through Z, any one of them, let alone grouped into all together at the same time. Everyone grouped in together further. In other words, all groupings of humanity have been stayed even further incapable of being asked about, let alone to overcome. While as locations, areas, states, everywhere the species body is styles of logic, natures of logic, dependent upon those very attribute quality aspects in nature. They had the means to discern beyond, when you were little kids in America, you had means to discern that it wasn't really our power and might, the design of things. Even in colonial times, they could build better when they weren't even allowed to speak about it. I hope my voice thing worked now, because the voice wasn't working for it. Oh, yeah, thank you, people. How we can make hyper peace. In other words, they change people's evidences, and they're forcing people to speak through others because the differences of the guilt of all sides of criminal civil cases are work criminal enterprise government, even when they're not in those cases. And the interbranch and news at the same time, they have the same needs to hide as family members, as the kids and their family members, the middle-aged and adults. There is a remote possession / S of difference / S appreciation, and or that body is sensed. We must pay attention to, for example, before we come to reading authors and instances and using names like Jane Austen's and her words and phrases and sentences, like, for example, sense and sensibilities. We have to appreciate how that breaching method forced people to pretend free speech to an extent. / S. Otherwise, they were sensed. That was only capable of being, and it is still today. They bring up nuclear threats separate from this and from that when there's exceptions too. Same thing. The problem is there's technology, and every side wants to have negotiations. There's only 24 hours in the day. We have to sleep for part of it. We have to eat for part. People are going to be talking for part, in other words, which is nonsense. Even just forced by nature, all this. Nature shows us anything. And as long as we try to follow its way, / S, means come out of nowhere. There's a difference between having the country speak for international law as they spoke, try to defend that more and more. We have to search locations, areas, and states. Are they really capable of speaking for us? And I'm not saying blame them, but go find out a name. They can't do that, honestly. That's recorded too, but you guys can't have to follow the mandated law. You can't follow mandated law, but that's collusion/S. You guys dishonestly pretend not to fathom how the interbranch in the prisons could have been and where are collusions with crime scenes and with the criminals since before they were caught, even to try to force some not to get caught into forced collusion/us going to get caught anyway. Now they have to keep their mouth shut. Everyone's being haven't been used remotely distinctly. So for the breaching methods function by how non-distinctly is self-valued by everyone or that everyone's sensing. How anyone with integrity would have put a bottom on markets? Anyone with integrity would have allowed to a surface where and how James Madison, our founders, directed us to understand why they had to force everyone to help them and why and how they had to leave their names unknown, our plural founders. That's important too because nature itself obfuscates how that was and is used to obfuscate how nature itself was is showing us that Native Americans are our founders too. Even if we don't know if they were a part of that plural founder group, unnamed, but we know they existed. And even if they weren't part of that group formally, the only reason that plan had a means to be pulled off was because of the natural native population's native syntax counters to the hyperforeign. It had already been collusion/S, though not discerning. We could discern it by discerning how it taught you guys to pretend the North or the South was about freedom or about slavery, the way they taught you. Both sides were forced to fight against slavery or have worse, the outcome/S, because that's the only means James Madison and the plural founders had against the method/S that was his entrenched. Had all those sick things to keep the simple thing/S from being discerned. And have all the collusions that no one wanted being and have been blamed, and that appreciated as precedent. The statutes formal or not. Appreciation. Come on, vaccines. I teach us things. Please please, someone to have CBS ask them to fix the fake conversations with me and to finish completing the confessions, the confirmations, and to stop hiding what I caught them doing with retired police chiefs and with sexual and medical offenders of kids and further their roles with the campuses through time. Increasingly, the South Civiello has people tied to him who have conversations and syntax through time involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me. Off campuses, with people on campuses. I never had a word of campus. I even saw him outside of the room. I even saw him at on recess or anything like that. One time he was in my fourth grade class, South Civiello. These are a bunch of people with the Facebook pages, interbranch, and with the campuses too, with sexual and medical offenders. The Bridge Superior Court's Facebook page is also collusion with Wethersfield police and people that post there, but also the people running the Facebook pages have collusions with various natures of organized crimes and with sexual and medical offenders of kids at the same time with their own kids involved. A Leahy family is also brought up in confessions by Wethersfield police to me. I don't know this name because they're switching and forging names too. They confess that too. A former police chief, Cintron, is also involved with police chiefs that faked the conversations that ties to me as a kid and as an adult. They had to hide that with the news too by pretending it with WFSB. These are also sources of WTNH
that have been planting evidences on our campuses and along roads and routes and at corners of streets involved. Fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. Increasingly, people with whiting forensics are also involved. But you have to get them on paper. One thing we think is people just pretend they don't understand what people say. Pick a thing. There were fake conversations about me. There were things confirmed on Facebook about relative body dumping spots as people tied to the time rolls with World Trade Center attacks, predicate acts, and the principal child abuser in one's years before that. All kinds of corruption. In other words, pick one thing. The interbranch have been forging and switching names, faking ties to me. They have some Mendez police brothers involved intercities, with the people interstates and intercity and interbranch and foreign and per worse. But they have next to Fox Connecticut News with some Mendez brothers and people associated with them since they were kids, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against people they don't even know. They try to make fake exceptions for the others involved with them. These are also people that were involved with them from other campuses, where they're putting the differences of guilt at this campus or that campus when the people don't even know each other at all, and they try to make fake exceptions with some. They're using wire crime acts and methods, mail crime acts and methods, predicate acts with facts methods slash S. They also have some black KKK themed, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, etc. Inter and intracultural, as one's personally and professionally. All kind of medical corruption next to Harvard Hospital with a bunch of names with the same house slash S with the extended family members. Further involved with predicate acts on my street, planting evidence, fake ties, fake nature, ties to me since I was a kid. Never had a word of conversation in my life with a Robert Rodriguez. Tried to pretend other and confirmed it on Facebook, and then they took my Facebook page, etc. Same thing with Enza Fienza and his cousin and other people regarding a detective Dylan and people with the name Dylan and his neighbors, like a Sal Seville reportedly. He lives somewhere near there. And people in their roles with the buildings next to Fox Connecticut News is involved with predicate acts through different ownerships of it, though, through time. Locations, areas, and states where I use remotely criminally foreign influence slash hyper criminally foreign influence. We're supposed to pay attention to this. There's also people with Allegro's Cafe. I was only nice. I went there, had ate breakfast. I don't know. Allegro's Cafe is apparently with his neighbors. They forced him with these Mendez police involved with organized crime with fake ties to me with the federal evidences crimes with these Mendez police, fake ties to me. Intercities involved with sexual medical offenders of kids too with their neighbors and untimely deaths. And I can't get them on paper. Interbranch, they switch names, forge names, put fake transcripts in the branch. Also as evidence, also various ways recorded. Also as people leading before the World Trade Center attack. I didn't know all their names and all that was involved with it. But people in the Brent Superior Court, Harper Courts, and the District Court, but I only knew about the Brent Superior Court, Harper Courts have people with foreign and domestic military who make confessions to me, requests for help. Between campuses too, there were also confirmations. People from my grammar school, increasingly as teachers, and that weren't even mine, and one I had that I never even had a conversation with. A Mr. Pruzzi increasingly involved with educators of a Ray Cologne and of a Tim O'Brien with federal evidence crimes, people that were involved with federal evidence crimes in my area, as ones involved with these Mendez police, with a principal upskirt nature, with worse digital crimes and organized crimes with the kids. I caught him involved with them too. And I never had a word of conversation with the older Mendez police brother, and he was who pretended other and forced my Saudi friend to collusion slash us with them. Also, people with the name Tomorrow were our recorded confessed demonstrate confirmed above, and Scalora. And these are switching names into branch, and it is a method recorded apart with predicate acts method slash S collusion slash S, where the differences of guilt between people being mean verbally, dishonestly at the same time to the police forms in the courts, or them forcing criminally foreign influence, fact, true nature, quality aspects of nature. In other words, their guilt. The difference was is used too, where people appreciate it, or that body was sensed. Before we get to sense and sensibilities, we have to get to what was entrenched. All the databases were criminally foreign influence. Tactically delusions raw, too, are people regarding it. Anyone who wants to deny that the databases were criminally foreign influence is going to have nature itself in demonstration with with inherently, actively, and increasingly. There'll be a whole bunch of reasons and demonstrations simultaneously. Their logic will have inherent to it, and they will be incapable but of faking exceptions or evaluating them being having been faked. Okay, boxing on one per take. In other words, so we can put down means out of nowhere because we all agree about so many things. And in other words, we can make hyper positives out of negatives. Plus, think about all those people stacked like that. Then all of a sudden, in other words, we have computers too because we make those temporary locations, make a system. We can make temporary locations into temporary things that will make lasting, increasingly be increasingly positive value everywhere. Where body is as nature exists distinctly from body is physics, so we can discern how non-distinctly too everything is the hypervolume science, and it's the special difference here concentrated, or is it forced from here? As force-based nature transfer, as for as leaves of IDs more probably have been defined. Prepare each mind. Vaccine. I teach those things.